We're taking a little bit, I don't know how quite to explain as much as we're going to go back a step to last week, but then we're going to take it up a notch as well at the same time. And this really wasn't what I had planned for today, but as we came off of last week's study, where we're talking about being chosen by God, we're talking about the opportunity to choose Him back. In other words, to accept Jesus as leader and forgiver in our lives, by acknowledging with our mouths He's the Son of God, believing in our hearts He died and rose again. We're giving our lives to Him. That's how the Scripture calls us to God. It says it's the only way back to God. So He chooses us, and we choose to take Jesus on and take Him as our leader and forgiver in our lives. And as we come into His team, last week we were talking about the difference that should make when it comes to the light of Jesus in our lives. When we're talking about the radiance of His ways and of His power and of His love and of His grace into our lives, and yet we still seem to struggle with darkness because we're stuck in this world still at this point. But at the same standpoint, we looked at how light has all these great definitions to it, of how it gives things form, how it takes and illuminates reality, how it ignites us, how it's this natural agent. And the only real definition we have of darkness is that it's the absence of light. And so when we find areas in our lives that have darkness, the solution to the darkness is to, instead of focusing on those circumstances in a way that we're shadowing out Christ around us, is to take those circumstances and say, okay, Jesus, I need you. I need you. And we talked about what it means to live in the light and to walk in the light and illuminate the light like the moon does at nighttime of the sun into this world, that is our job as well. That's our calling. That's our privilege that we have within the world and the people that we care about. I was thinking about it just even earlier this morning of just how crazy it would be that if we would think the least amount of bringing Jesus, who we love the most, into the lives of the people around us that we love the most. And so we're kind of digging into some of those things. And as I'm still kind of contemplating that and kind of moving towards this week, I'm reading this book, which I don't, if you know me well, I don't read a lot of books for leisure. It's just not my thing. I'm kind of a video guy. I'll do it for study, but I'm going through a book by a pastor by the name of Chip Ingram. Has anybody heard of Chip Ingram before? He's kind of a national guy. He's got local ties. He grew up in Columbus, and now has been out in California way, and he does a lot of good ministry. And I've been reading a book of his called From Good to Great in God's Eyes. I mean, some of us might know the book From Good to Great. That's kind of like a leadership business book, and it's a good book. I can recommend it. It's not like quote-unquote Christian book, but it's a good leadership book. But this one is how to move from being a good life to a great life in the eyes of God. And it has some things that are just as basic as reading, you have a great life, read great books, which are, like I said, I've already messed up on. It has things a little bit more profound that we talked about before. To have a great life, have great mentors, have great leaders in your life. But this particular chapter I was going through was talking about taking and living great dreams, having God's dreams in your life. And he talked about how everything that we look at within the Scripture is all about God being passionate about doing great things through His people to reach the world and for the church and for His glory. I mean, from beginning to end. This last Wednesday night, it really wasn't planned, but just kind of came up. We were sitting in youth group, and we were talking about how God uses the least of these. And I said to the kids, it's just to throw out your favorite Bible character who's not Jesus. That's cheating. Who's your favorite Bible character? And as they threw them out, I said, okay, here's where they started. This was the guy that flunked out and had to become a fisherman. And this was the guy that his dad didn't even think was worthy enough that he would have any kind of future, because this is how he treated him here. This is what happened here, and this is what mistakes they made, and how God used them otherwise. There's all kinds of things that this world would tell us that we can't really have anything spectacular for God in our lives, but that's exactly what He's looking for, so He gets the glory when He does awesome stuff through people like me, right? And so He's just kind of digging into this, and He's talking about the awesomeness of how what's even better is like when you're living God's dream instead of like your own dream, and you're asking God to sprinkle a little pixie dust blessing on it. When you're living God's dream, then when things aren't going the way that you think that they should or wish they would, and you're praying, God help me, guess what? He's going to help you because you're living His dream. You're in His steps. And so He's kind of got this bigger mentality than a lot of us do in our lives. And I want to kind of explore into that a little bit more. Matter of fact, Scott, with your help, there was a verse in there from Psalms that he was talking about where God was saying, ask of me, and I will make the nations your heritage, and the ends of the earth your possession. And when we look at something like that from a big God who has big resources and has big dreams and wants you to be a part of it, then the question becomes, Am I in touch with the big dream that God has for me in my life? Am I living God's big dream for me in my life, or am I just making it through just like everybody else? I think it's a kind of a question that we need to dig into and talk to a little bit. Am I tapped into God's big dream for my life, and am I living it? While I'm going through this, another thing came through, and I say it that way because it really wasn't a coincidence. I think God moves things around, and if I give him credit for something he didn't do, then I'm still doing better than taking credit for something he did. But anyways, I'm going through some stuff online, and I come across a church, I believe it's called Mount View Christian Church in Columbus. I can't really tell you all the details about how I came across it, but I'm like checking out their website, and I'm looking at their stories of church, and I think it kind of got my attention a little bit. One, because it looked like they were really involved in their community, seemed like they would really be in the church. And then when I started reading their story was a lot like mine. That they were planted as an American Baptist church back in the early 70s, that they are now a non-denominational church. That change happened about 7 or 8 years ago. They were very awesome and gracious about how they stated why God led them that way, but I could tell that some of the same reasons that I had, they had, and it just kind of struck me as kind of a part of my story. So then I went to the pastor's page, and I'm looking at this, and it's a pastor, Kevin Snyder. And then I'm like, I know that name. Why do I know that name? You guys have that happen? It's like, to me, it's like daily, because you guys know how I am with names. But I'm trying to figure out who this guy is, so I decided I'm just going to send him an email and ask, because it was driving me nuts. And I said, you probably don't know me. I said, my name's Tom Hypes, but your name's ringing a bell. I'm an old, ABC guy myself, and just trying to put it together and stuff. And the email came back that I kind of pushed it on to him, because he's like, I know your name too, and I don't know why. Now I got him wondering about it, and we're sharing stories, and we got mutual friends. And he did some camping ministry where I did all my camping ministry. And so we decided we're going to have lunch. So we're having lunch I guess it's technically breakfast, on Tuesday. Don't want to lie to the church. On Tuesday, and we're going to just kind of hang out. But I think I'm going to watch one of his podcasts. Just kind of get a feel, see if I can catch any mannerisms that reminds me of somebody that I knew 30 years ago or something. And I'm going to be honest with you, I'm a horrible sermon listener. The one thing you heard all day, huh? Okay. Laughed at me anyways. I am, and a lot of pastors I know, we're really bad at listening to sermons. Either because we get antsy because we're used to being the one talking, or because you start watching the pastor and seeing what he's doing instead of what he's saying. Because we'll say, okay, he's setting up this point, he's doing this. You kind of start watching those type of things. I was really engaged with the sermon. I mean, I was really taken in about him talking about a personal relationship with Jesus and getting personal with Jesus in our lives. And as he was talking, he threw out this point, and this is what kind of got my attention the most, is he started talking about the hours in a week that God gives us. Okay? Still with me? Because that was the easy part. Okay. He gives us a certain amount of hours. And in their church, with their discipleship model, they encourage you to be involved in 3 ways. One, Sunday morning church, which is worship, taking and being in a small group, which is fellowship, and taking and serving somewhere within the church, which is with your ministry, doing your own personal ministry over time. He said, so let's say you're nailing that from their perspective, and you're doing all 3 of those, and let's say it's 2 hours each, so that takes 6 hours of your week gone, and you being part of your church family. Then let's assume you get 8 hours of sleep each night. And realistically, some of us are thinking, only 8 hours? And some of us are going, 8 hours, right? I know we're all different, but just for general overall, let's say you get 8 hours of sleep. It says if you take that 6 hours plus the sleep hours, that leaves you 106 hours each week that you're accountable for to God. And his question was, what are you doing with that 106 hours? And we're quick to answer, well, I've got my job, and I got my family, and I've got to get dinner on the table, and I've got all these responsibilities. That is somewhat reality and somewhat not. What are we mindfully doing to make choices that when I go before my God and say, this 106 hours a week that you gave me, this is how I lived your big dream? Are we living God's big dream? Are we in tap with God's big dream for your life? Or are we just going through the motions like everybody else is trying to get through? You with me? That's kind of what I want to dig into, and I want to press against a little bit. It's not one of those things like when you walk out of here, I'm going to tell you what your personal big dream is between you and God, because I don't know. But my hope is that we can come up against it enough that we can maybe hear the Spirit speak a little bit, that we can talk honestly about some of the things that keep us from God's big dreams in our lives, and then also find some encouragement we can hold on to as we start moving forward, maybe in some new ways, depending on what God puts on your heart. Sound good? So let's get our Bibles out. We're going to go back to 1 Peter. That's where we've been spending most of this particular study in. 1 Peter chapter 4, verse 12 is where we're going to start. And I think, well, I'd like to start, since Peter's been doing a good job with it, is talk about the challenges that come up and how we move past them. Because if you want to start living God's dream for your life, or you are living God's dream for your life, you're going to find that Satan comes against that. I mean, it's just the way he works. He's going to try to get you back to either a comfortable space or just completely inactive or broken down space to keep you from living what God has for you, for your marriage, for your friendships, for your family, for your parents, for your school, for your work. And so I wanted to kind of let Peter talk to us about some of those things. It's going to be a little bit repetitive sounding again, third week in a row, but that's because we need repetition, because a lot of times we'll feel something on the Spirit, get back into the real world, quote unquote. By Tuesday, we're back to the way we were last Saturday. So repetition from different directions helps us. So let's take and just read this a little bit here. I'll share a couple thoughts with you, and then we'll see what God does from there. Verse 12, Peter writes this. He says, "Beloved, do not be surprised at the fiery trial when it comes upon you to test you, as though some strange thing were happening to you. But rejoice insofar as you share Christ's sufferings, that you may also rejoice and be glad when his glory is revealed. If you are insulted for the name of Christ, you are blessed, because the Spirit of glory and of God rest upon you. But let none of you suffer as a murderer or a thief or an evildoer or as a meddler. Yet if anyone suffers as a Christian, let him not be ashamed, but let him glorify God in that name. For it is time for judgment to begin at the household of God. And if it begins with us, what will be the outcome for those who do not obey the gospel of God? And if the righteous is scarcely saved, what will become of the ungodly? What will become of the sinner? Therefore, let those who suffer according to God's will entrust their souls to a faithful Creator while doing good." Kind of like last week, I just want to slap up 3 points to you and just babble about them a little bit. So with God's help, there's 3 things that kind of stood out to me when I was going through this section. First one is don't be surprised by trial. Then we have see suffering differently, and we have live by faith. And we're just going to leave that up here for a few minutes. And by the way, if you're a note taker, kind of work your hand a little bit. There's a lot of notes today. If you like taking notes, you're going to be very, very happy. Got a lot going on. So those are the 3 to get started with. Do not be surprised by suffering really echoes back to the part that I was talking about last week. Last week he told us, arm yourselves with the knowledge that if you follow Jesus, you're going to share in the suffering of Jesus. Do you remember us talking about that? And when he means arm yourself with that, that's because it's going to happen. And if you don't know that up front, then you're going to be tempted to sit down on the ground, pick up daisies, throw them on the ground, mad, upset. I can't believe it's Monday. Everything's falling apart. I was following God. I thought it would go a lot easier than that. That's the type of stuff Satan wants to get you into when you start following Jesus. So arm yourself with the knowledge that you will suffer, you will sacrifice at times if you're going to follow Jesus because Jesus did. And you kind of have to count that cost. When I was talking about that prayer earlier, where you just accept him as leader and forgiver in your life, and you follow him, and you're saved, and you have that intimacy, that's great, and that's powerful, and that's wonderful, and it's free, but it also costs you everything. Because I'm going to follow Jesus now. He's my creator. He's the one I'm going to follow. And there will be times I suffer. Just know it up front. Just know it up front. And as Jesus looked at leaving heaven, coming on this earth, living in this cesspool that we live in, going through the cross, going through the resurrection, he looked at that. He knew that was going to happen and said he loved you enough to do that. He said, I know up front that's going to happen. And I do it because I love you and I call you by name. If you're here last week, you know what I'm talking about. In the same way, when I come to Jesus and I say, I'm going to give my life to you, but I'm going to have some cost because of it, you're worth it. You're worth it. So I'm going to arm myself and know that trial is going to come. It's just part of the walk. It's just part of the direction that we go in. It's part of following him. It's part of being on the unpopular team. It's part of being on the narrow road instead of the wide road. It just comes with the lifestyle. But the option is having it easier without Jesus, heading straight towards damnation. right? You're worth it, Jesus. I love you, Jesus. I'm in. So don't be surprised by it. And quite frankly, and this is the part I really want to hit with you, see it a little bit differently. Because I think we're conditioned in this world to look at suffering like it's pain. And if you're thinking, what's the difference? That's a good thing. I think part of the problem is we look at suffering like it's pain, because that's how the world defines it. Pain is a good thing because pain tells you, stop it. Right? You got a little kid that wants to go up and touch the oven, and you tell them 1 billion times over, don't do that because you like them, and then you get this real evil look in your eye and you let them touch. You evil person. But no, they sneak up when you're not watching. They touch themselves and they burn. That pain is there, so they take their hand back off real quick, so they have the least amount of pain. If it hurts, stop. If I'm running on a day that's hot outside, if I'm over in Thailand hanging out with Jenny being all whiny about how hot it is, and she's been whining about how hot it's been here the whole time. It's just so cold for Jenny. But if you're going constant and you're not drinking water, you will start feeling physical pain because your body's saying you need some hydration. That pain is there to stop us from pushing too far before things get dangerous. That's not how suffering is when you're a Christian. Suffering is not a sign to pull back. And many, many people, through the Bible, through the generations, and through this community, and through our lives, and probably through us, have spent time going through a little bit of suffering, deciding it's the same thing as the stove. I won't do that again. I won't put myself in that place again. And so we box ourselves into a place where we're not suffering. In other words, where we're comfortable. Where we're not suffering anymore. You still with me? That's dangerous for us. That's life-crushing for us. A lot of times we bring up the verse, if you put up James for me, have we come across, and again, not to keep talking about the youth, but the youth's going through James right now. In James 1, 2 through 4, this verse knocked me over the first time I read it for what it really is, and I've continued to hold on to it through the years. Count it all joy, my brothers, my sisters, when you meet trials of many kinds, because you know that the testing of your faith produces steadfastness. And let steadfastness have its full effect, so that you may be perfect and complete, lacking in nothing. Let's go ahead and leave this up for a second, Scott. If you look at that, that's a flow chart. He says when suffering comes, instead of pulling back, dig into it. Because when you got that suffering coming in, you got these trials coming in, that testing of your faith really produces kind of a perseverance or a steadfastness of, Satan, you're not going to stop me. Satan, you're not going to rip me off. Satan, you're not going to take and stop God from having the glory. And so you continue and you learn how to be steadfast in the face of the wind that's coming against you. I'm not going to veer off of God's ways and what he's called me to do just because more trial has come. I'm going to learn steadfastness. And as I continue to persevere and it has its full effects, then I'm growing to be perfect and complete and lacking in nothing because I'm growing in Jesus while this world is trying to take its cheap shots from the left and the right. Still with me? So in other words, if you start experiencing suffering as a Christian for Christ, not because you went out and smacked somebody and you had no reason and, I'm being persecuted, but if you're suffering for Christ, what that is a sign. What we need to redefine in this head, that's a sign we're in the right direction. We're growing. We're maturing. We're reaching people. We're making a difference. You've heard it a billion times over. If you're not making a difference, Satan's not going to give you any hassle. He wants to spend time on other people. But if Satan's come against you and you're learning how to be a champion and a victor in Jesus Christ, and you keep going even though you don't have the money, even though you don't have the time, even though you don't have the supporters, even though some of your friends are falling away from you, you keep going, you keep growing, you are maturing in Jesus. So let's go to the next slide. So we'll just put them back up there. But this is what we're talking about seeing suffering differently. I don't know who watches the same TV shows as I do. I know I sent out a list that you guys are supposed to be watching, but I know Sandy is. We're watching New Amsterdam. Anybody else watching New Amsterdam? A few of us? Okay. New Amsterdam is basically the new hospital TV show because it seems like our country cannot survive without a hospital TV show, even if it's crappy. On TV, I'm kidding. I love Grey's Anatomy. No, I don't. But I love you. But I remember back to Marcus Welby, and I'm sure there was something before that. There's always a hospital TV show, if not 6 or 7. This new one is, again, a hospital. It's where it starts. It's kind of all about the money. They bring in a new guy who's in charge of everything. He's had a life experience where he sees things different and he wants to help people. He doesn't care about the systems and the bureaucracy. Is making these big changes and all this craziness is going on. And it's a good show. It is a good show. And this particular week, because he does this and the rest of the staff are trying to figure him out and get signed on a little bit, he keeps making decisions that cause them more hassle. He doesn't follow the system, so it causes them more work or puts more pressure on them, or things get a little crazier than what they normally would be. And somewhere within this past episode, about early on, one of the people say to him, "Why do you always keep choosing the hard road? I mean, there's a system right here. Why do you keep choosing the hard road?" And he said, "Because it has better views." And so then the show keeps going, and they have different things, and it's going up and down. And this particular person chooses one of their own hard roads and has an incredible story to it. And he talks to her at the end, and she's just wiped out from going through it. And he says, "Are you okay?" And she said, "Yes, I just decided to choose the hard road." And he goes, "How was it?" She goes, "It has better views." Anybody being able to make that connection without me even having to say anything? Choosing Jesus, choosing the harder road, changes everything, and it's so worth it. We got to see suffering differently, and then live by faith. And live by faith. I really focused in on verse 19 on this. If you got that up still, therefore let those who suffer according to God's will entrust their souls. That's a conscious choice decision. I'm going to live by faith. I'm not going to live by the evidence around me. I'm going to entrust my very being to the faithful Creator. If I'm going to trust my soul to anybody, those two words nail it. He created me. He designed this. He knows me better than I do. He has a plan for me. He has a dream for me. And he has been faithful. And there was no point in my life that I can look back and say he has been unfaithful to me. I can say I didn't understand. I can say that I was angry. I can say I was disappointed. But I cannot look back and find a time that he was unfaithful to me. I'm going to entrust my soul to the faithful Creator while doing good, while living the big dream that he has for me that I've put myself into. I love Peter. He's so good. Holy Spirit through his word, he's so good. Are you tapped into God's dream for your life? And are you living it? That's a question we have to ask ourselves over and over again. Let those who suffer according to God's will entrust their souls to a faithful Creator while doing good. There's a story I like in the Bible I've talked about a few times over the years, but it's been a little while. It's in Genesis 11 and 12. We won't have that up on the screen for you. You can just write that down if you want. Genesis 11, Genesis 12. If you're using the YouVersion story, it's in the possible key verses. But the first part of the story is all about this guy named Terah. How many people have heard of Terah? Yeah, that's okay. That's pretty normal. No, hardly anybody's heard of Terah. He's like a paragraph. Terah is a guy who had his family, and God called him to pick up everything and move to Canaan. And if you guys know what I'm talking about, that's the Promised Land. God says, "Hey man, I've got this big dream for your life, a dream for your family. This is where I'm going to build my nation. I'm calling you first. I want you to go." And he says, "Absolutely, God, I'm in." And he gets his family together, and they get everything together, and they start on that track, and they get about, I don't know, maybe it's halfway point, and they get to a place, I'll make sure I get this right, called Haran. And it says he settled there. That's it. In other words, on this journey to God's big dream, he got to a point where it's like, this trip is kind of a drag. And it's hot. And it's hard. And I've got all my stuff on donkeys and horses, and the kids are whiny. And Canaan sounds good, but Haran's not that bad. This is a nice little community. They even got a Pizza Hut here. I can settle right here, right? And he settled there. And we're used to, that's the settlers, the great settlers that came to the United States, that kind of stuff. But settled means settled. In other words, God had that, and he said, this is close enough. It's too hard the other way. And that's all we hear of his story. That's why no one's raising their hand when I ask how many people have heard of Terah, except for a couple. When he lived his life, and he lived his life well, and then he passed away, God came back a second time and talked to Terah's son. Terah's son is named Abraham. How many? How many people heard of Abraham, the great father of our faith? Right. You know why? Because God came back and said, hey, that journey is not done. And Abraham goes, I'll do it. I'll take the family. I'll take all our stuff. I will go to the promised land. And he went to the promised land. And it was a journey. And there was a lot of detours. And there was a lot of struggle. And in no way, shape, or form was it easy on Abram and his family to be able to pull off what God had put onto their heart. Read it. Trust me. Following God does not mean things are going to go smooth. But God was faithful, and God led him through it, even when he screwed up, even when he sinned. When he came back to God, God kept him going on the direction to be able to get to the promised land. And it wasn't just the promised land for his people like the original dream. He came back to Abram and says, I know you've always wanted to have a boy. And I know you're too old to have a boy. And I know your wife is too old to be able to have a boy. But I'm going to tell you what I'm going to do. And you're going to think, what, give him a boy? I'm going to give you so many descendants that will outnumber the stars that you see above your tent. Because I'm crazy about you. Because of how faithful he was and how he moved on when his father would not. And we do have a choice to settle or to live in God's dream. There's a buddy of mine in town. His name's Rowan Anderson. If you guys don't know Bo, he's awesome. He's a pastor over at the Gathering Place. He looks like a GQ model. It's disgusting. If he is standing by the side of his car talking on the phone, waiting for you to get out to go into Tim Hortons and have something to drink and to talk, he looks like a GQ model standing on a phone. If you look at casual pictures of his daughter coming to his room and taking a picture as he's waking up and the lights are coming on, he looks like a GQ model. He is the epitome of a beautiful man, and I tell him often. And he's an awesome spiritual man, and he's a great leader. I love Ro. And Ro, for his first anniversary at the Gathering Place, they had a celebration, and they invited different people to come, and I went, and different people were speaking from his past, and he had a mentor there that had been a mentor of his for about, I think, 2 decades, 20 years, speaking. He was like a surprise guest, like Ro was just blown away that this guy was there. The whole thing was surprise. And as they were talking, I saw putting together the pieces that this guy was talking to Rowan, and he's been with him since before college. And I started to put together a picture that Rowan's father was not a good man. He was not the man that I see when I get together with him or when we're doing ministry together. He was a hard man, a tough man, a challenged man, a damaged man. And as he was talking about that and comparing it to Rowan, there was one point that as he's looking at Rowan, he's just like sitting right in front of him. He says, brother, you have traveled farther than your father had ever traveled in your life. And I don't know what it was about it, but I saw it tear up. You know, my dad and I are close now. We have our own kind of challenge back, maybe tied into some kind of emotion. But you have traveled farther than your father has traveled. Wow. In my parents' generation, I was talking to another friend about this the other day, they didn't believe in divorce as quick as we do. And I know a lot of people in that generation that if they were the younger generation now, they probably would have been divorced 3 times over, but they stuck to it because you just don't get divorced. And I know a lot of people in that generation that look back and say, you know, what if we didn't get married? What if I married that guy? Or what if I married that woman? There's a lot of what ifs. But then there's something that seems to happen when you're like in your 60s or your 70s that you just settle in. And you love each other. And we're committed to each other. And I'm not saying all marriages. I'm just saying that I see this trend. They just kind of settle in and move on. And they're comfortable and they're happy. And we can have that in our lives. But don't settle for less than God's best. The way that you avoid the divorce factor is marry God's best. And be committed to it if you're going to get married. If you're going to be single, then stay single with God's best and stay committed to it and go for it. If you're going to be a parent, if you're going to be a friend, if you're going to be a mentor, if you're going to be a follower, go farther than your father ever did before you. The only father that will outpace you is the faithful creator that you entrust your soul to. Everything else is secondary. There is nothing that is stopping you from what God has for you besides us. Are you tapped into what God's dream is for your life? Not is God tapped into my life in a way that I'm better than I used to be. Are you tapped into God's dream for your life? And are you living it? What are you doing with the 106 hours a week that we're accountable for? Where are we letting God challenge us and push us and staying in comfort? Where are we embracing suffering that is growing us instead of spending too much time watching New Amsterdam? If we choose the hard roads, the views are much, much better.